Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report. I am your host, Amy Zawi. Today, we have an exciting guest joining us, Risto Huvila, all the way from Finland. Risto is an extraordinary gentleman. I've known him for a few years now. He is an author, he is a musician, he was a businessman, and he is a staunch advocate for Israel. And he takes that work very seriously, and it manifests in a variety of ways. He maintains 2 weekly broadcasting programs on Finnish TV about Israel and Middle East politics, one that is about domestic politics, and he also has led many delegations to Israel, delegates of Finnish officials or other European nations' officials, to advocate and reveal the truth about Israel and what is going on there. He is also part of the chair, I should say, of the Federation of Finland-Israel Associations, a leading pro-Israel organization in Finland, and he's also a graduate of the Yad Vashem University International School for Holocaust Studies. Risto, we are going to talk about your book, and we are going to talk about a lot of the work that you have been doing. But first, let me say welcome to the program. It is so great to see you. And I want to concentrate today a little bit on your Pro-Jerusalem Alliance initiative, because that is very timely. And give us some background on that. But in doing so, please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your journey that brought you to such a love for Israel and the various types of work you have done in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Great to join you in this interview, and wow, you pointed out so many things, but I will start with the last one. How did I end up here doing things for Israel? So as a Christian, I was never really interested in Israel until 2005, late 2005. And at that time, I had something that I call divine intervention. And suddenly, I just felt that I need to start reading the Bible from the beginning, from Genesis, to understand what is God's purpose for Israel and the Jewish people. And I started to read the scriptures with a new lens, and so that's what I've been doing ever since, more than 20 years. And little by little, I understood what I hadn't understood. So with my walk with Christ, a few decades already, I've never paid attention to Israel or to the Jewish people. And suddenly, after I started to read the scriptures in a new way, a new approach, I understood that the whole Bible talks about Israel and the Jewish people and God's plan for them. So it's been exciting 20 plus years now. And first, my interest was only religious and biblical, but then I wanted to know if the historical events match with the biblical prophecy, and I started to read history books about the Jewish history. And of course, when you go further, the early history, and then you come to the 1900, when the history of Zionism started, and then you, little by little, you end up in politics, Middle East politics, and all these layers, a biblical layer, historical layer, and political layer. So they've been in my life, I would say, on a daily basis, and it's exciting to see how the Word of God is something that doesn't fail us. Things happen according to the scriptures, and even though everything that has been prophesied hasn't taken place yet, but the evidence of the reliability of the scriptures is so high, so we can trust that the rest of the prophecies will come true one day.
That's a great way to look at it. And that is such an important journey for you to share, because so many Christians didn't really realize the significance of Israel, ancient or modern, or the Jewish people, ancient or modern, because it wasn't part of the narrative that their church or their preachers had as they were growing up in a church or going to church as an adult. And then when you read the Bible yourself and you ask for revelation, it suddenly becomes quite obvious. I'm sure we could talk for hours about why the church does that disservice. So many churches, I don't want to, they're not all the same.
Yeah, but
Risto,
let me say about the churches. In my church, prior to this divine intervention, I hardly ever heard anyone preaching or teaching about Israel. And, I think today there are three different types of churches. Those who teach and preach about Israel. Then there are those who are teaching and preaching about the replacement theology, so that the church has replaced Israel. And then I think that the largest portion of the churches are those who are just silent about the whole thing. And that's very sad. And I think the churches and the pastors, leaders, teachers should really pay attention to this very topical issue called Israel.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think that's a great breakdown of sort of that aggregate look at what's happening in the church. I think it applies in North America as much as it probably does in Europe where you are. Your passion, or your discovery rather, of God's passion for Israel and the people and part of his story, history with a capital H, who engaged in a lot of different initiatives. You took politics, history, and biblical principles and brought them to fruition. And you did that in a variety of ways. Like I said before, you led delegations of folks to Israel to make certain discoveries, to learn certain things that you knew to be true, that are true, that are not representative in our governments. In doing all that for 20 plus years now, you have particular initiatives or projects or tasks that you have embraced in that 21 years of advocacy. And the first one is your Pro-Jerusalem Alliance. And there's a website for that, projerusalem.org. Encourage everybody to look at it. We're going to talk about it and share some screenshots. Tell us what this is and what led you to concentrate on this particular topic out of all the different things we can talk about regarding Israel, Jewish people, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Tell us about this Pro-Jerusalem Alliance and why you found it to be something you wanted to take on, bring to the world.
So the third layer, politics, it wasn't there 20 years ago, but a few years later, when I started to see that how the prophecies, when the prophecies come true, they come true through political decisions and mainly resolutions at the United Nations. And I've been studying the United Nations resolutions for many, many years. And, the result of condemning resolutions on Israel is something that I couldn't believe before I saw the statistics. An organization called UN Watch, which is, as its name says, it's focusing on the United Nations and especially on their resolutions on Israel. And when you end up on their website and they have a database that explains and shows the percentage of condemning resolutions from the General Assembly or Human Rights Council or a World Health Organization and other UN organizations, if you only read those statistics, you end up understanding that Israel is the devil of this world. So there are no comparisons to Israel. Israel has been condemned so many times that actually you don't believe that. And when, for example, when we see how many times the United Nations General Assembly has condemned Israel, it's more than twice compared to the rest of the other 192 nations. And for example, the World Health Organization, WHO, so the only country they have ever condemned is Israel. 100% of the condemning resolutions focus on Israel. And if you think of the level of healthcare innovations related to healthcare and hospitals and related technology, so you can't find any other places in the world where those things are, in that high. And but for the world, Israel is the bad one, and the World Health Organization is only condemning Israel, and that's sick. Okay. Having said that, most of the UN resolutions, they talk about the two-state solution. They talk about, occupied Palestinian territory, and they talk about the two-state solution returning back to the pre-1967 lines, which means that according to most UN resolutions that are about Israel, so the nations of the world, they are to divide not only Israel, but the Jerusalem. And actually, I think I showed you a map, what I produced, to understand what is at the stake when we are talking about dividing Israel for the two-state solution, or dividing especially Jerusalem. And maybe you want to take up that map to the screen now.
Yes.
And you can see that if we return to those lines that were there before the Six-Day War in June 1967, at that time, Jordan, they occupied East Jerusalem, including the Old Jerusalem, including Mount of Olives, including the Western Wall, including almost all holy traditional Jewish sites. But not only Jewish sites, but the Christian sites, Via Dolorosa, and many other Christian treasures. And in my recent trip to the U.S., in the end of May, early June, I met Israeli diplomats, and I presented this map to them. And one of them, he advised me that and said that, just in 1948, when the Independence War started and was started by the surrounding Arab countries, Israel suggested that these then present lines would be the official borders for the state of Israel. So at that time, Israel was even willing to leave East Jerusalem to its enemies. But those enemies didn't accept what Israel proposed. So basically, when I speak to politicians, and even when I speak to Christians, and there are many of them, both Christians and politicians, who say that, I think that the Palestinians deserve their own state, and they deserve also Jerusalem as their own capital. And then I'm asking them, do you know what would it mean if we return to pre-1967 lines? And then I have explained them about what holy Jewish and Christian sites would be left behind the lines. And they say that, wow, I didn't know that. And that's basically the lack of knowledge of history, lack of knowledge of political decisions and resolutions, and lack of the biblical understanding. And that's why I wanted to really start doing something to wake people up to understand what would it mean if there was a two-state solution and if Jerusalem would be divided.
And that's a pretty interesting discovery to make that. And I have to admit, even though I've been to Jerusalem and to all those sites, and this, of course, after 1967, I didn't realize when I was there, I mean, all of these things are under Israeli jurisdiction. It's very safe. It's very clean. It's very accessible. Tourists from around the world, Christians and others, visiting these sites, Jewish and Christian sites. And it didn't occur to me that, wait a minute, if we went to those pre-67 lines, I would be in an area that was not controlled by Israelis. It makes me think, well, look what happened in Bethlehem. Okay, so Bethlehem was sort of given over to jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority, the PA, and in the 20-some years of that rule, yes, Christians can go there and visit the sites, but it's certainly far more tenuous and difficult. Jews can't go there at all without taking their lives in their own hands. The sort of the maintenance of these sites is degraded, and the Christian population of residents has had a mass exodus. Bethlehem going from 80% Christian to, I think, less than 10% right now. And when I look at that actual piece of history that has occurred, and I think about what the UN is proposing or others to divide Jerusalem, I wonder then, and you can comment on this, if we had a divided Jerusalem and all of these sacred sites were under a PA or Palestinian rule, so to speak, might happen? Might it look like Bethlehem, or do you think something else would happen? I mean, what's your comment when people start to push back a little and say it's going to be fine, or they're not really concerned about these historic sites? Because I do think the UN also, in all of their resolutions and historic site declarations, has sort of taken away the Judaic identity of some of those sites as sort of world historical sites. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, for a reason which is very hard to understand is that as we go back to the Oslo Accords, so the whole land of Israel or whole Judea and Samaria, the West Bank as they call it, was divided into three parts, A, B, C, and the part A is under both Palestinian Authority in civilian issues and security issues. Area B is split between Palestinian civil administration and Israeli security administration. And then there is Area C, which is in Israeli hands, both civil administration and the security administration. And if you look at those A and B areas, there are no Jews other than just minor protected settlements. And the Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas, said already some 20 years ago, and this is recorded by the Reuters news agency, that in the future Palestinian state, there will be no Israelis living in that state. He didn't say that there won't be any Jews living there, but that's what he wanted to say. So it was kind of a politically more correct to say that no Israelis. But the whole thing that the world is backing today, the two-state solution where there are no Jews in the Palestinian land, and that's okay for most of the world. So that, you know, it will be, or it would be, Judenrein. So no Jews living in the Palestinian state. And that's okay for the world. And that what makes me, I don't have Christian wording enough to describe my feeling and attitude about that. But the world is sick. They have lost so many countries, the majority of the UN member countries, have lost their moral compass, and they are just voting for resolutions condemning Israel without really understanding what it would mean for Israel, what it would mean for the Jewish people. What did you ask, by the way?
Oh, just asking if we had this scenario, like you just explained, this no Israeli, aka no Jews in whatever becomes a Palestinian state. We kind of saw a version of that with Gaza between '05 and today. Would happen to our holy sites, our sacred sites, Jewish, Christian, the heritage sites of both those faiths, if that's the case. And I also, to follow up on what you were just talking about, if Abbas was saying there's no Israelis, and what he meant to say was Jews in a Palestinian state under their jurisdiction, you never really hear, and you would never hear, is Israel proper in any of its borders say, well, there's no Arabs here or there's no Muslims here. So can you comment on the alarm bells that would be ringing in our heads if this vision of Jerusalem happened and what it might look like, and compare that to what we as Christians who support Israel constantly applaud and did applaud in great enthusiasm back in 2018 when Trump moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, when we say that Jerusalem is the undivided eternal capital of Israel, the Jewish people. Can you kind of compare those two things, what the notion of the undivided Jerusalem and sort of the split outcome that would be if it does get divided up?
You know, the President of the United States is the last lock, or how would you say that? The gatekeeper.
the last watcher on the wall, so to speak.
Yeah. And in December 2016, just about a month before Trump took the Oval Office, so President Obama didn't veto the UN Security Council Resolution 2334 that basically made it illegal for Israelis to live in the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem. And we only need a president like Obama in the future who doesn't understand or who doesn't like Israel and who is ready to buy the narrative of the world and the pro-Palestinian movement, so that Palestinians, they deserve their own state and they have every right to have Jerusalem as their capital. So once there is that kind of a president in the White House, so the game's over. And I'm expecting, or I am afraid that this kind of event will happen one day, hopefully in my lifetime, but I'm pretty scared that it might happen. And Obama was a horrible example of a person who played with, different cards or different rules and just wanted to pass this resolution 2334 without vetoing it.
So what can we do here? I know you mentioned you were in the States at the end of May. We got a chance to visit during that time when you were in Washington, engaged in several meetings. So the Pro-Jerusalem Alliance, how can we here in North America, the Jerusalem Connection listeners and followers, our network, what can we do to sort of spread the word about this topic, support this initiative? What are the things we can do? We can go to your website, check there for content, and there's a contact us page. But Risto, what else can we do to take this topic and educate people on it and get them engaged so that they can, as far as their political power might allow, sort of be on the forefront of what policies come to pass out of America or wherever they may live about Jerusalem being and staying an undivided capital of Israel.
Great question. You know, I live here in Europe, Northern Europe, Finland, and I try to understand what's going on in the United States because, as mentioned, it's the last gatekeeper and really defender of Israel and Jerusalem. And what alarms me, and what is really alarming, is that the Republican Party has been very much pro-Israel, pro-Jerusalem, but the younger generations, according to number of surveys, they don't care that much about Israel, about Jerusalem, about the Jewish people anymore compared to the older generations. And I think that that's number one thing is that, you know, we challenge pastors and teachers in churches to focus on the youth and to help them understand what is the biblical idea for the Jewish people, for Jerusalem, for Israel. And if America loses those voters who understand Israel and the biblical meaning for Israel, so I think that's the almost end of the game, because then somebody can come to the White House, or a majority of Congress will be of those people from both parties who don't understand and who don't appreciate the biblical worldview. And that's the main concern. It's about the Christians. And of course, it's about the Christian politicians, and we should not only to teach them about the biblical approach about Israel and the Jewish people, but to help them understand, as I think that what you are doing in the States, so that you help voters understand who are pro-life, who are pro-Israel, etc. So that is crucial. And this is something that here in Europe, here in Finland, we haven't focused enough. And that's why almost the whole Europe is against Israel, and Europe is pro-dividing Jerusalem.
Well, I agree with your assessment. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, and like you said, we need to challenge our pastors and our teachers, Sunday school teachers, school teachers, quite honestly. And I have to say, we have to challenge the parents. Parents really need to be the first line in that education, because we cannot necessarily rely on the pastors. Not everybody's at a Christian school, and the public schools are infiltrated with this ideology of demonizing Israel. It's in our textbooks. That point, Risto, and I don't know if you have much of this in Europe, I would assume you do, but we've got a large contingent of pastors and churches and denominations who sort of want to say, let's keep our blinders on, come on Sunday morning, preach Jesus and love, and stay out of politics, don't get your nose dirty. But we know in America, and it's being talked about more this year than ever, because we're at our semi-quincentennial, it's a hard word, 250 years of our founding, a lot of television programming, YouTube programming, podcasting programming is digging into faith-based education and framework that the founders had when they built our country, framed our Constitution, even our Declaration before that. And Christians were deeply involved in policy making and constitution writing, and Christians were a big part of the Civil War and other parts of history. You, as a Finnish gentleman, probably know more about that than most Americans, because you wrote this amazing book. It's called The Miracle of Israel and President Truman, and you did a phenomenal job of documenting what I am sure most Americans don't know, and certainly most Christians don't know, but would appreciate to know, level of faith that when it's in our leaders, when that faith is part of our leaders' personality and thinking process, what that means for domestic policy as well as global policy. So tell us, if you can, just briefly, what made you write this book about an American president? You wrote this book when you already sort of put Israel back into your focus, or for the first time into your focus for your Christian walk. And now you're looking at the historical prophecies and you're looking at the politics. And then it came to fruition in this book. So tell us about how you even decided, I'm going to write this book about Harry Truman. What brought you there? And then tell us where we can find the book, because it's an amazing book.
So the divine intervention was 2005, and it took 7 years until in May 2012, I was on a business trip and visited Kansas City. I was there meeting a major potential customer. That was the only reason I flew there. That's what I thought. But in the afternoon after my meeting, I found myself at the Harry Truman Presidential Library and Museum. I knew that President Truman had recognized the State of Israel immediately after it was founded on May 14th, 1948. But when I came to the museum, so I found the first hall, what I just entered, filled with all kind of Israeli things, Judaica stuff. And it was like, in the streets of the old Jerusalem, all kind of Judaica things for sale, other than they were not for sale in the museum, but it looked like, and became very interested. What are these things doing here? And I went further. I read all the texts behind or under objects or pictures. And after having spent that afternoon in the museum, I understood that Harry Truman played a crucial role, very critical role in the formation of the State of Israel. Not only recognizing it, but he did so many things before it was declared. And I bought a number of books in the museum shop, and at that time I visited the U.S. quite frequently. I was in charge of a company. We had a subsidiary in the United States, and so on my long flights, I had time to read. And when I was back in Finland, I was so excited about the Truman story, and I understood that there were something between the lines, that those authors that had authored those books that I bought, they hadn't realized Harry Truman's deepest motivation to help State of Israel to be born or to be recognized. And so I was able to had access to the Truman archives, and I started to dig the archives, and so everything was already in 2012 digitized, and you could search the archives, different search words, and I did, and I spent a lot of time in his archives, and it was evident that it wasn't just a political maneuvering, but his biblical understanding that made him a champion for the Jewish state. And pretty soon after I came back home on that trip, I started to speak about my visit to the Truman Museum, and in one event there was the editor-in-chief of the Reader's Digest, the Finnish edition, and he came to thank me after my presentation, and I was kind of joking him that wouldn't this be something that your magazine deserves? So I could write an article about Harry Truman. And he said that, yes, that's what I was thinking about. So would you? And I said I would. And I wrote an article. And after that article was published, a major Finnish Christian publisher, their publishing manager contacted me and said that you've wrote a great article in the Reader's Digest. Why don't you write a book about Harry Truman? And I said, yes, why don't I? So, and that was the beginning of the story. It took a couple of years until it was ready. So it was published in Finnish and in English 2018. So 6 years after my trip to Harry Truman's museum. So that's the
It's an
story behind the
amazing
book.
read. That's quite a story, and it does seem like a divine intervention that you had that meeting there in an afternoon off, and you found yourself wandering into the
Yeah.
museum and library. So, without giving a spoiler, as I love how this book talks about his childhood, his mother in particular. So you have some examples of correspondences that he has had, Truman had. Tell us one thing in your research that really surprised you about Truman, something that you just weren't expecting or elated you in some way. But is there one thing you can share with us that just stands out from all that research you did and archive digging and whatnot?
There are so many. But I would say that because of his faith and biblical understanding, when he became president in 1945, April 12th, he inherited all the administration from President Roosevelt, and almost all of the administration was pro-Arab. So they thought that, the Arab oil was critical for the U.S. forces to win the war. And if the war continues, so we need to, or the U.S. must keep good relations with Saudi Arabia and Arabs. And the Arab countries had already signaled that they are not happy that the United States would support the Jews in Palestine. And especially when it came to the situation where Truman took the presidency, so the Arab countries were really worried that Truman would do something that was against their will. And they were right. Truman did something that was against their will. So he helped the Jewish leaders and helped them to declare the independence of Israel. And in my book, I'm describing many fights in the Oval Office or in the State Department where, those officials, senior officials from the Roosevelt administration are shouting Truman and shouting against Truman's plans to recognize the state of Israel. But Truman was so clear and independent and bold and so he kept his opinion. And I think that, of course, we are seeing the present administration that they are very clear-minded what they are doing. But I think that when you suddenly end up in the Oval Office and you inherit the administration from the one who was president for more than 12 years, so that's something I admire in President Truman. He kept his biblical faith and did what he needed to do.
That's a great way to look at it. A lot of Americans know that history, if they know it at all, just sort of from a 50,000-foot flyover. And Truman was the first one to, congratulate and affirm the Declaration of Independence by Israel. sort of like that was an out of the blue thing, but it wasn't an out of the blue thing. It was
Yeah.
a long trail to get there. And that's what you so brilliantly document in your book in a way that is also very exciting to read, because you see that struggle and you're kind of rooting for Truman to hold the line.
I have one thing to comment. From Washington, I went to New York in my recent trip and attended a Jerusalem Post conference. And I had the opportunity to meet your U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Walsh. And I gave him my book. And he looked at the cover and said that, Truman has been really the best Democratic president ever in the United States. And
That's a
I
good way
agreed.
to look at it.
Yeah, yeah. So
That's great. That's great. Now, your book is available on Amazon, right? For Americans to find it?
I'm just finalizing the availability. It should be there within, I would say, early. So
Okay. Great summer reading. It's a great book for summer reading, any time of reading. It's also a great book if you happen to have high schoolers or college age kids that are involved in political science or history classes, because it is it definitely has your voice in it. And even though it was, your Finnish is your first language, but it's a storytelling approach to the history,
mm,
which is what is engaging to the reading. So we really appreciate that greatly. So we are so grateful for all the work that you're doing, and we are behind it. Again, everybody go to Pro-Jerusalem Alliance's website, which is projerusalem.org. We will share that link with you. Please visit it frequently as Risto adds more content. Hold of that book. Check Amazon in July. It's great reading about Harry Truman, especially to celebrate our country, the intricacies of how faith is a cornerstone of what built America in all its various greatnesses. Risto, we can't wait till you are back in States to visit us again. And hopefully I will also see you in Jerusalem sometime soon and the occasion arises. And I do believe the Lord has blessed your footsteps and leads you along the way. And we are excited to be able to follow you on that journey and learn from you.
yeah, thank you. I'm open for all kinds of speaking invitations, and I'll be there sooner or later.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you again. God bless you and all that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Amy, very much for this interview. God bless you.
Bless you. Bye bye.
Bye.
If you enjoy these conversations, please visit us at www.thejerusalemconnection.us. Find all our podcasts on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast program. Follow us on social media, subscribe, like, and share our content to reach the broadest audience.